Well, the one thing that is always true is I am consistently inconsistent. I have been busy. I've been traveling. I've been doing all kinds of things. And my health has been, I would say, like a 50 out of 100, a 5 out of 10. Just and I will be taking care of that. Appointments have been scheduled. Things will be happening. All of that excessive backstory you didn't ask for, to say. I kind of dropped the ball, didn't I? Like, I am so far behind, per usual, on my recent reads. We are here today to do a recent reads, but before that, hi, if you're new, or you forgot my face because it's been so long, I'm Mrs. Pizza. Winnie's having a good stretch. Oh, that was a good one. You want to come say hi? Oh, are we all coming? We are all. Someone got a little jealous. I'll show you her face. This is the Winnie in my halo of lights. You kind of smell, but it's like a good dog smell, you know? It's the kind that a mother appreciates and everyone else thinks is nasty. Come here. Oh, this is the cheese. I don't think I've ever gotten to do this on camera with the cheese before. This is the cheese. She also likes me sometimes. Oh. All right, introductions done. Time for some books. In this recent reads, we have 1 5-star. We have 3 horrors. We have 1 cozy fantasy that made me feel the feelings. We have 1 short story collection that had some hits and some misses. We had 1 absolutely phenomenon. It was everywhere. I feel like everyone I know that doesn't even read books has read this book. And we had me. I read these books. First things first. That was a phenomenal, crispy can open. Today we are drinking Diet Dr. Pepper, because fun fact, it's delicious. So the first book we're going to talk about, which was included in a vlog, and all of the vlogs that pertain to books that I will be talking about in this recent reads will be linked in the description. Give them a look-see if you want to see me have in real-time thoughts and feelings about these books. First book, Strange Buildings. This is the 3rd installment of this series by this author. This is a Japanese sensation. It is a mystery series involving a lot of illustrations of floor plans, and that's kind of the whole gimmick. You look at many different illustrations of floor plans as the mystery unravels. You're looking for things that are quirky or off about these floor plans, and as you investigate these spaces, mysteries unfurl. So in the 3rd installment, Strange Buildings, we have our narrator. Once again, he has garnered a reputation of lover of weird and quirky floor plans, so people are constantly sending him stuff, and he has gotten together 11 different case files, 11 different buildings that are all interrelated in some way. Sinister things might be happening in these places, but you just keep looking at the floor plans, having conversations, and then re-looking at things based on new information that you receive. I don't think these are actually mysteries that you could solve on your own. There is very much an element of constantly getting new information and revisiting what you've seen to reinterpret it based on new information. I just kind of let my brain go along for the ride. I am definitely someone that usually figures out the mystery, usually solves the big reveal. I am really good at pattern recognition, but I try and turn that part of my brain off, especially because the end of this is very much going through each individual floor plan, talking about what we've learned, wrapping it all up with a great big bow. These are books that are incredibly quick to get through. I mean, there's a lot of illustrations in them. You're looking at floor plans. It's kind of a good palate cleanser for my brain. I truly enjoyed this and will be picking up any more of these books that this author puts out. The next book I picked up after that was Nothing Tastes as Good. This is a new, I'm going to call it dark comedy / horror that just came out. This is not necessarily satire, but is dealing with very topical issues. This is the story of Emmett, and he is a young man who has always struggled with his weight. He has some sort of binge eating disorder based on traumas and things that happened to him when he was a very young man, but his weight has ballooned to a very high number. And Emmett ties a lot of his self-worth into how others perceive him and his weight. He has very low self-esteem. He even has a lot of horrible thoughts he has about himself inside his own inner monologue, but he also deals with like the microaggressions and the horrible comments that people make about his weight in his everyday life. Emmett is struggling, and he thinks that in order to solve all of his problems in one foul swoop, he needs to lose weight. To Emmett, being skinny means being happy. So he sees an ad, I believe it's like on Instagram or some sort of like social media, for a new weight loss drug called Obexity that seems a little too good to be true. This story is told through several different points of view. I'll call it mixed media, but you're not only getting Emmett's story, but you're also getting Emmett doing blog posts about his weight loss journey, and you're also getting a case study and an investigator who you know from the jump. I'm pretty sure it's one of the first things you read in this book. This drug had a previous participant in a drug trial who turned to cannibalism. And so the drug is trying to prove this was some horrible thing that the person was predisposed to before they ever took this weight loss drug. But Emmett, now on this weight loss drug, starts feeling very strange side effects. This was darkly funny, but also could be a little bit triggering. Again, Emmett doesn't think nice things about himself, and other people aren't necessarily the nicest to him, but it gets a little silly over the top. And Emmett has a very like tongue-in-cheek way that he does his blog posts. He's trying to be a micro-influencer, but he takes a lot of his self-worth from how people view him and pump him up on the internet. It was fine. I liked it just fine. I think the end got a little weird. I think I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. Like, I liked it. I liked what we were talking about. It was funny and dark and gory and messed up, and maybe there was cannibalism. The next book I picked up after that was an absolute 5-star for me, and that was The Caretaker. Having really enjoyed this author's, I believe, debut, but the first book that I know about from them, called We Used to Live Here, was my favorite horror the year it came out. I truly enjoyed it. This author knows how to absolutely freak me out. Whatever they think is scary, I absolutely think is scary. So I decided to pick up The Caretaker, which is this author's newest book. In this book, we are following Macy. She is a young woman who is the guardian for her younger sister after their father passed away a few years prior. They're absolutely struggling financially. Macy has not really been able to hold down a high-paying job. She's dealing with a lot of depression. They're both just struggling. When one day Macy sees an ad for a caretaking position, she goes to a very secluded and wealthy part of town to do an interview for this position and finds out it's not exactly what was advertised, but the pay is just too good. Macy can't say no. When Macy accepts this position, she is given a videotape which on it has a set of rituals that she must perform as the caretaker. Now, this is interesting in that nothing is overtly ominous, right? Everything's just weird. And it is stressed very highly that Macy must stick to the rituals. She absolutely has to perform these rituals at these very specific times in this very specific location. Things like making sure that none of the lights are on between this time and this time in the morning, making sure that certain doors are locked, things like that. Things, again, that are just weird, not necessarily awful. Now Macy is in this location performing these rituals when obviously things start to get creepier and go wrong, because it wouldn't be a horror book if everything went straight to plan, right? This book absolutely freaked me out and ends in the way I like my horror books to end, where you absolutely gasp, but yet not every question is answered. There is an overarching ominousness. Ominousness? Not sure if that's a word, but you know what I mean. Ominous nature of this world, of this situation, of everything that Macy is going through. It was creepy. It was weird. It freaked me the hell out. I gave it 5 stars. The next book I picked up after that was a dark fairy tale fantasy called Honeysuckle. This is a book that could be touted as a retelling of classic works of literature, but I think is so far removed from the folklore or the stories that it's using as inspiration that I think it should be seen as its own thing. This is the story of Rory, and he is a young man who lives out in the country, very secluded, with just him, his older sister, and I believe like a maid and a tutor. Their parents have just kind of dumped these 2 kids here. When one day Rory is absolutely bothering the crap out of his sister. I believe she's 16 and he's around 8, so she's aged out of wanting to play his silly games anymore and just being exasperated by this little brother following her around. Play with me, let's do this. Rory's sister decides she's just gonna make him a friend. So she uses magic to create a friend for Rory out of sticks and bits of nature, flowers, and little bits of trees. This is something that is an acceptable form of magic in this world. Magic exists in this fantasy world, even though we don't delve too deep into it. A child that is the same age as her younger brother is made for him, and he promptly dubs her Day. Now, Day and Rory have an absolutely magical spring together. They run around and play and climb trees and go swimming, and Rory and Day are absolutely best friends. But at the change of the season, Day starts to disintegrate. Now, after Day is made, she looks and presents absolutely like a person. You would not know that she is what she is until she starts to deteriorate. Then the flowers and sticks and all the bits of nature that make her up start to become visible as she literally crumbles. Well, you can imagine a young boy like Rory watching his best friend completely fall apart in front of him is wholly devastating. And he runs, gets his sister, who puts Day back together again. And this starts a cycle of Day disintegrating and being rebuilt specifically for Rory. In the beginning of this story, like I said, Day and Rory are absolutely best friends. It starts in the spring, in the opening of this friendship, when everything is young and innocence and play. But as the story progresses, as we go through the cycle of the seasons over and over again, Rory is obsessed with Day falling apart and leaving him, and so he becomes obsessed with finding a way to keep her together, while Day is stuck in a cycle of being rebuilt to be the perfect companion for Rory. So obviously, as they age, as they get older, as motives become different, that childhood innocence disappears, the relationship of Rory and Day becomes darker and darker and darker. This was a really quick read for me. I really did enjoy it. I think I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, and it was definitely a dark fairy tale inspired story. The next book I picked up after that was something I love. I've seen it called a couple of different things on, the Wild West of the internet, but I love what I have heard dubbed bubblegum horror or pink horror, which the definition of what I'm talking about is something that is both female-centric, but usually slightly funny and involves a lot of body horror. Feminine, but body horror. Body glitter and carnage. Just pink and bows and girlhood, but also just absolute violence and decay. These two things juxtaposed make me incredibly happy. Some of the best examples I can give are movies like Jennifer's Body, or I've seen a lot of people talk about Death Becomes Her. I usually put this in with Jennifer's Body in that it usually involves younger characters, whether that be like high school or college age girls. If it involves older characters, involves some element of youth or coveting youth. Pink horror, bubblegum horror makes me incredibly happy. I was looking for something that was going to give me that sort of Jennifer's Body type feel to it, and I found Bedrot Baby. This is a teeny tiny little book and definitely scratched the itch that I was trying to get to. This is the story of Baby, and she is living in that post Y2K, like early 2000s in Florida. So we're talking lots of velour jumpsuits and rhinestone flip phones. She has a recently failed relationship and a recently failed art career that has kind of put her on a trajectory where she is not only working as a sugar baby, but like sells things online. She like shoplifts underwear from Victoria's Secret and sells it to people on like pre-OnlyFans type things. She is using a lot of hustles to try and make ends meet, but she's not feeling fulfilled. When one day she goes on a really awful date with one of her sugar daddies, and shortly thereafter, returning home, is attacked by like a mysterious woman just outside of her home and almost immediately starts having strange side effects. This is gross and nasty, but not only has like those young women wearing a lot of pink and living in those early 2000s with a little bit of snark and a couple of laughs that I like, but also has that coveting of youth and beauty that pink horror usually really likes to focus on. I had a really good time with this. It's gross, it's silly, it goes over the top, and it was really, really fast to get through. Sometimes you're just looking for some bubblegum horror, and sometimes you find it. The next book I picked up after that was Seasons of Glass and Iron. This is an author that I've truly enjoyed. Do I have it? Okay, sorry. I had to do a little readjusting. My legs were asleep. I previously enjoyed this book that you have got to be kidding me. I just searched my shelves like a weirdo, being like, I know that I read a book from this author and enjoyed it, and that's why I decided to pick up this short story collection. It's right here. I just found it in the viewfinder. The River Has Roots is a teeny tiny little story that also contains a short story at the very end called, what is it? It's like John Hollowback and the Witch. Yep. John Hollowback and the Witch, that was going to be contained in a short story collection coming out, aka Seasons of Glass. So I was very excited to pick up something else from this author. They have a very like lyrical, magical, I don't want to say whimsical, because that kind of, to me, whimsical can sometimes be something a little more childlike, where this feels a lot more like folklore type fairy tales. It would fit right in with things from the past. It has that sort of tone where you're learning lessons, and sometimes the end of these stories tend to be slightly brutal, but yet fairy tale quality to them. But like old fairy tale. Not new fairy tale, old fairy tale. You know, the one like where Cinderella's sisters have to hack their feet off, you know? I decided to pick up this one, and I ended up giving it 3 stars, which I think is pretty good, seeing as how some of these short stories were for me and some of them were just fine. Short story collections are hard because you'll really like some stories, and again, like some of them you're just like, okay, I read it. One that I think I really enjoyed the most was Seasons of Glass, which is the story of a young woman walking with shoes made of iron, and she must walk through these shoes. So she wears them until they completely disintegrate, fall off her feet, and puts on another pair, and she has a number of pairs of these shoes that she must get through before she can return home. When she comes upon a hill made of glass, and on top of the hill sits a woman on a glass throne holding an apple. And these two characters are in these very different fairy tale scenarios for very different reasons, yet similar reasons, and these two characters interact with each other. I really enjoyed this. It definitely felt fairy tale inspired, fairy tale darkness, but yet had a core to it that made you hopeful for these characters. I also really enjoyed the story And Then Their Lips Rang with the Sun, which was honestly quite hard to picture, other than it was like incredibly brutal. But it was a society where there were different groups of worshippers who worship different deities within the culture, and they gave their whole lives over to this. And it was very important that these people perform their rituals in order for the world to continue, for the sun to rise. These women with bells sewn into their lips had to dance every morning for the sun, and they gave their whole lives to this. Whereas there's also people that must perform rituals for the moon and things like that. But this was a very sad story that was about giving themselves over without question to these things, and the things that they had to sacrifice in order to provide for the rest of their community or the other people, and how unfair that was to a lot of them. I really liked it. But like the brutality of having, like, you couldn't speak if you had bells sewn into your lips. Like, ugh. There was also another story in here that was inspired by I'm gonna put it on screen because I've even looked and tried to see how to pronounce this. It is a Welsh word for like a Welsh fable folklore story. And the story of Honeysuckle had a lot of these elements in it, but there was also a story in this book that was inspired by this character within folklore as well. It is a girl made of flowers and nature who, in the Fable folklore story, gets turned into an owl, I believe. That might be something I should look into instead of saying it on the internet without any knowledge if that's true. Anyways, those are the stories I liked. There was other stories in there that I enjoyed, but the lip bells and the iron shoe glass hill girls, those are my favorite stories in this lyrical short story collection. The next book I picked up after that was Yesteryear. And if I am the first person to tell you about Yesteryear, I congratulate you on being able to stay off the internet in all its forms, because I cannot seem to avoid this book. It is absolutely everywhere and has been absolutely everywhere for a while. That being said, that's probably because Anne Hathaway has bought the rights to this. It's going to be made into a movie. It's very divisive. It's also got the hot button topic of trad wives in the center. This is the story of Natalie, and she's a trad wife influencer, and she sucks. Natalie just sucks. She absolutely is awful. And we start this story with Natalie waking up in a beautiful morning in her beautiful home with her beautiful children and the 2 nannies that take care of them, and the in-house producer that she has, waking up to make more content to feed her many followers her just trad wife nonsense. We then have Natalie go through a strange time jump situation where she ends up in a traditional wife setting. She somehow, through some means, ends up in a place she recognizes but doesn't, with a family that she doesn't know, who they are living this very traditional, out on the farm, all by themselves, secluded thing, and Natalie is trapped here. The book goes back and forth, going back to Natalie when she was in college, when she first met her husband, kind of the journey she takes in order to become the trad wife influencer we see in the beginning of the book. And then we also have this timeline going on where Natalie is stuck in this like horrific trad wife situation, trying to figure out how she got here, who these people are, what's going on. Natalie is awful, and you're going to hate her, but that's the point. Like, that's the absolute point. This I really enjoyed. I liked the ending. I literally couldn't put this book down. I had to know what the absolute was happening. I hated Natalie. But I was supposed to. I don't always have the best time in stories, especially that are very topical / satirical, where we have a character that is our narrator, who is our only viewpoint, that is absolutely insufferable. Like, I usually have a hard time with that. The example I always use is Yellowface. I could not stand that story because there was no reprieve from the awful that was the main character. Sometimes it works, and I don't know what the secret is in the sauce, but I really enjoyed Yesteryear. I liked following Natalie, even if I didn't like Natalie. And that is a real credit to the author, because how did you do that? How did you make me want to hang out with somebody that I absolutely couldn't stand? You are at all interested in Yesteryear, I found it to be an incredibly quick read, and something that if you are doing it for book club, there's plenty to discuss. You want to talk about Natalie and her nonsense. And the last book we're going to talk about is Thistlemarsh. This is a somewhat cozy fantasy that I decided to pick up. It's a little bit historical. It's got fae and gardens. I feel like this was a good springtime book to pick up, in line with most cozy fantasies. Even though there was big things we were talking about, we weren't trying to save the world. We were in a much smaller place with a much more cultivated group of people trying to just make it through the situations we were in. I love a cozy fantasy when the mood strikes me, so I decided to read this story, which is the story of Mouse, and she is a young woman who was a nurse during World War I. She is traveling to the estate that she has recently inherited. Now, Mouse was not first in line to inherit this estate. She grew up here. This was her uncle's home. Her cousin was first in line, and he passed away during World War I. Her brother was second in line, and he was a soldier who was severely injured and will probably spend the rest of his life hospitalized. So Mouse, now third in line, travels to this beautiful estate that has some tie to the Fae world. In this alternate history, the Fae and the human world used to interact a lot, and then sometime around the French Revolution, something happened and the Fae left, and no one has seen a Fae in about 100 years. So there are places that are Fae blessed, like this house Mouse has inherited because at some point an ancestor of hers was good friends with the Fae king. And so this house historically is important. And because of that, when Mouse gets here, there are very specific rules she has to follow in order to inherit this house. And the two big ones that she has to deal with are, in order to inherit in the next, I believe it was like month, like 31 days, she has to either fix this house up to absolute pristine order, which it is not in. This house has fallen into disrepair, or she has to get married. because I don't know, misogyny, the patriarchy. I have no idea why this woman has to be married, but these are the rules she has to follow, and neither of these options sounds great. So Mouse has to figure out how to fix up this Fay-blessed house in order to keep it for reasons that are talked about, aside from it being just a magical Fay-blessed house, but also because if she doesn't, it'll fall into the hands of someone that we do not like. So we are now in this Fay-blessed house, touched by magic, finding out secrets along with Mouse. I thought this was sweet and fun, but also I am interested to see if this author maybe goes back to the French Revolution and we talk about why the Fae disappeared. There's a lot of time to play with here, so we could do more historical, cozy fantasies in this world without necessarily needing to find out more about Mouse's story. This is a world that I would definitely love to explore with this author. For people, I keep saying these are my comp titles. If you liked the Spellshop or the Enchanted Greenhouse, I think you'll like Thistlemarsh. Although different settings, I feel like there's something about the stakes and the adventures in both of these books that is probably about the same level as in Thistlemarsh. Is it Thistlemarsh or Thistlemarch? Now I have no idea what I've been saying and what the correct answer is. Pretend I've said it right this entire time. But if you like Thistlemarsh or Thistlemarch, whatever it is, you'll also like these books. There's also a third one in this series set to come out, I believe, sometime soon, but these are cozy type fantasies with fays and other magical creatures, and like kittens with wings. Like, who doesn't love that? But that, kids, is where we are going to end this recent reads. I hope you heard about at least one book to spoil your TBR and add to your soon-to-read list. If you had fun hanging out with me and the dogs, please subscribe. It truly means the world to us. I hope you're reading good books out there, wherever you are, and I'd love to hear about them. Tell me way too much about them in the comments. I love to find out about new books that way, and we'll see you next time.